Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about a very hot and also controversial topic, which is the topic of age gap relationships. But just to be clear, I'm specifically going to address the issue of age gap relationships between adults. So with that said, there's two questions I'm going to attempt to answer today. Firstly, are age gap relationships morally wrong? Secondly, does the Bible explicitly or implicitly prohibit age gap relationships? The reason I'm addressing this issue in this way is because the Bible clearly teaches that God's moral law has been written on our hearts. So, basic right and wrong is something that we know intuitively through our moral sense, which of course means that even people who have never read the Bible before know basic right and wrong. However, it's also the case that the Bible provides us with specific moral knowledge and prohibits certain acts. So it's important for us to know if this particular issue is one of those acts. So let's begin. I'll start with the first question first. Are age gap relationships between adults morally wrong? I assert that they are not morally wrong. What is meant by morally wrong is something that is objectively wrong, which means it's wrong independent of anyone's opinion. Now, there certainly are things that are objectively wrong, such as murder, rape, child molestation, etc. These acts are morally reprehensible regardless of anyone's opinion. This is a fact that we recognize due to our moral sense. No one needs to convince us that such acts are evil. We simply recognize that they are. And in the absence of some sort of defeater, there is no justifiable reason for us to doubt the conclusion of our moral sense regarding these acts. But is this the same sort of experience that people have when it comes to age gap relationships between adults? Are they truly led to believe that such relationships are morally wrong, even evil? Some people might think that I'm looking at this from too serious of a perspective. But the truth is, there are people that believe that age gap relationships, such as a gap of 10 years or more, which is the general definition of an age gap relationship, are truly wrong. Some people will even compare an age gap relationship to child molestation. But I honestly think such conclusions are not based on anyone's moral sense, but rather on misguided social norms. Now, just to be clear, I'm not trying to make a positive case for age gap relationships. Generally speaking, I don't think it's ideal for people who are 10, 15, or 20 years apart to engage in a romantic relationship. But I also don't think it's morally wrong, and certainly not evil. So let's look at this from a logical and biological standpoint. Typically, people who are opposed to adult age gap relationships will simply assert that they're wrong, instead of providing any kind of an argument for precisely why they're wrong. They act as if it's a given that such relationships are wrong. This is nothing more than begging the question. Begging the question is when someone assumes the very conclusion that they're asserting. So this objection can rightly be dismissed due to the fact that it's nothing more than an assertion based on an assumption. Now, the other objection that I've heard over the years, which is based on a kind of argument, is that age gap relationships are wrong because when the one person was such and such age as an adult, the other person was still a kid. For instance, Tim, who's 30, is married to Samantha, who's 20. This relationship is wrong because when Tim was 20, Samantha was only 10. Tim is basically a child molester. Now, is this a fair and honest characterization of Tim based on the argument that has been put forth? I submit that it is not, because the argument that has been put forth is nothing short of fallacious. Let me explain why. It doesn't matter that Samantha was 10 when Tim was 20, just like it doesn't matter that Samantha and Tim were both babies at some point in the past, or that I like chocolate ice cream. Pointing out such things is completely irrelevant. People grow and develop and mature. Samantha at 20 years old is physically mature. She is a full-fledged adult. So to argue that it's morally wrong for her to be married to Tim because he used to be 20 and she used to be 10 doesn't make any sense whatsoever. She isn't 10 anymore. She has reached the adult stage of her life, the same stage that Tim is in. So how can it be morally wrong for Tim and Samantha to be married? As far as I can tell, it isn't morally wrong. It certainly doesn't follow that it's wrong because Samantha and Tim used to be in two different stages of life. They're not in two different stages of life now. they're in the same stage of life, the adult stage. Therefore, it follows that they can share that stage of life with each other. Now that we've went through this from a logical and biological perspective, it should be obvious that there's no basis for thinking that age gap relationships between adults are objectively wrong. However, if an individual feels that they are wrong, then that individual should not engage in an age gap relationship because they shouldn't violate their conscience. But they also shouldn't try to obligate other people to live according to their conscience. Let me also say this. Even though I think it's quite clear that no one can demonstrate that age gap relationships between adults are morally wrong, I also think people should be very careful about getting involved in age gap relationships. While it is the case that a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old are both in the adult stage of life, it's also the case that they're at different points of that stage. And that's definitely something people need to keep in mind when they're considering dating or marrying someone who is a lot older or younger than they are. Now let's turn to the second question. Does the Bible prohibit age gap relationships? As far as I can tell, the Bible doesn't address the issue of age gap relationships at all. However, there is at least one explicit example of what we would describe today as an age gap relationship listed in the Bible. And that, of course, is the marriage between Abraham and Sarah. According to the biblical account, Abraham was 10 years older than Sarah. Genesis chapter 17, verse 17. However, this is something that the Bible communicates to us descriptively rather than prescriptively. So we can't use it as a positive proof that the Bible actually condones age gap relationships. But it is nonetheless an example that we can point to. However, since the Bible doesn't address the issue of age gap relationships explicitly or implicitly, as far as I know it doesn't, it is the case that it's a matter of conscience, not doctrine. Therefore, if someone feels that age gap relationships between adults are wrong, then that's what they should go with. And if someone else feels that they're not wrong, that's what they should go with. That's how matters of conscience work. And neither one of these two camps should try to obligate the other to adhere to the conviction of their conscience. The reason for this is because if someone adheres to the conviction of someone else's conscience rather than their own, they will violate their conscience, which they ought not do. So, the Bible doesn't condone or prohibit adult age gap relationships. Therefore, this is a matter that each individual must decide for themselves according to the persuasion of their own mind. Being persuaded in your own mind is something that the Bible addresses in Romans chapter 14. So please read that chapter for clarity and understanding regarding being persuaded in your own mind. Well, guys, that's it for this video. So please let me know what you think. And remember to like and subscribe. Thank you.